They've been much better. They've stabilized a little bit since going out of the Champions League. And I think that's an interesting dynamic sometimes when I think teams, particularly of the level of Manchester City, who, let's be honest, are not good enough to win the Champions League, are not good enough to win the Premier League this season. When you get the weeks on the training ground, when you build that identity that little bit more than when you do when you're playing Saturday, Wednesday every week, I think you're seeing the benefits of Pep Guardiola actually getting to coach this team a little bit more.
Erling Haaland was back, I suppose, within the vicinity of the pitch. He started on the bench. And that's the interesting thing for City. They've had this late season resurgence. You said they've had not as much really to focus on apart from the Premier League and the FA Cup. Of course, they've reached the final confirmation there. They are up to third, 64 points from their 35 matches. So looking good now to qualify for the Champions League next season. They'll need to finish inside the top 5 to do it. But what's been the key to this late season resurgence from Pep's men?
Well, I kind of referenced that already. I do think that time on the training ground is underrated, especially for a coach as good as Pep Guardiola, but he really seemed to struggle for most of the year to figure out what the answers are. Obviously, in that midfield area was the number one. With no Rodri, it seems like he's figured out how to coach Mateo Kovacic into playing that midfield area a little bit better than had been earlier in the season, getting O'Reilly more involved in the team, McAtee involved in the team. The signing of Marmoush, I think, has been terrific for them. He's provided real spark in key moments. The swan song for De Bruyne gives them a little bit of extra motivation, but I was watching them today and the results have gotten better. They will on merit qualify, I think, for the Champions League come the end of the season. We'll see what happens with the charges and everything that could potentially come their way as a result of a points deduction, but I think they will qualify for the Champions League on merit. And I think the way that he's been able to figure out the solutions, I still watch them though, Adam, and I go, this isn't Manchester City. This isn't the level.
It wasn't a great game, was it?
This is not the level that we've seen the last 5 years. Even as they've won games and you're seeing them, I think, mount a charge towards the end of the season. They still lack quality. There's still players that clearly look like they're on their way out. I would include Bernardo Silva. There was an interesting moment in the game as well. Could easily have been a sending off, but didn't eventually get given. But there's a few players that I still think are probably on their way out, and they've got to figure out ways to reinvent this team and make them a little bit stronger going forward, because I don't think that the current group, if this was the group going into next season, you wouldn't consider them favorites for the Premier League. You wouldn't consider them favorites for the Champions League, which is the standard that they've set.
Yeah, they haven't been producing those performances that we've come used to against sides like Wolves, where they just completely hammer them.
Yes.
And you see the difference between a Manchester City, who are the dominant side in English football, versus the rest, really. What do you think they need to do to get back to that level of dominance in coming seasons?
I think the biggest thing when I watch them is a little bit of a lack of a physical presence. And Pep Guardiola has talked about this, that the way that modern football is moving, it is moving towards athleticism and physicality being a key part of the game. And let's be honest, it was a key part of the game for Manchester City. For as much as the beautiful football and the passing football that was talked about for Pep Guardiola was such a key part of things for years, there was also this incredible intensity that I think the thing you fear the least playing against Manchester City right now is not that their attack has fallen off, is that their defense from the front is nowhere near strong enough. You're not afraid of Bernardo Silva running at you at a million miles an hour, Raheem Sterling running at you. Even Kevin De Bruyne was a physical presence in that midfield for a while. They're thought of as attacking, creative players, but they press from the front and were difficult to play against. I don't think you could say that about the current team based on aging, based off of the physical profile currently of the players. I don't think they're defensively a very difficult team to play through, that when they lose possession in high up the pitch, you kind of see City in defensive shapes. You saw the 4-4-2 today, lining up behind the ball. They don't have as much possession because they can't go at you and win it quickly. I think that's the biggest thing that they want to address in the summer.
Yeah, they really miss someone like Virgil van Dijk, who can, in the centre of defence, a really physical presence, who can kind of shore things up. And maybe they'll go into the transfer market if they can over the summer to try and find someone like that. Before the show, we were talking about who's going to make the Champions League or not is one of those really interesting elements to the end of the Premier League season. We've made our picks as to who are and aren't going to get there. These are the sides battling for it. As I said, top 5 will get you in because of the coefficient. So Newcastle, Manchester City jumping above Newcastle into third now. Chelsea and Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa are the two sides on the outside looking in at the moment. I've said that it's going to stay this way, so I don't think Forest are going to get there, and I think Aston Villa have left it a little bit too little too late. For me, Forest just leaking oil. We saw that in midweek, and I think ultimately for them, the Europa League would be a huge achievement. And that probably is the level that they will enjoy, a good run in Europe next season. It'll be great for their fans to be back there. I think the Champions League was really chancing their arm, and I do think those other sides are, over the totality of the season, going to prove themselves to be stronger.
I think looking at those fixtures, the one thing that makes me think that this is going to be upset is the fact that Chelsea have a very difficult run-in. They have to play the teams that immediately surround them as well. They're home with Liverpool on the weekend, which, yes, they've won the league title already, but they're the best team in the country. If they decide to turn up on the day and deliver a good performance, I don't think Chelsea's best performance beats Liverpool's best performance on the day. So I think Chelsea could easily lose that game. Then they have to go to Newcastle. That's a very difficult place to go right now. And Newcastle are pushing for Champions League themselves. I think Newcastle are better than Chelsea. So all of a sudden you're looking, and then you got to play Forest on the final day of the season as well. I think Chelsea are the team right now that of the teams in the top 5 are most likely to drop out, in my view. They're playing Conference League as well. They won't really mind. Obviously their performance against Djurgården was good enough to have that 4-1 lead. They're going to rotate. They're going to go all in the Premier League in this close to the season. But I still haven't seen, when Chelsea played the biggest teams in the Premier League, that they deliver a good enough level of performance to beat Champions League caliber, to beat the teams that are left on their schedule. I think this is a team that still has a level to go to actually deliver against the biggest and best teams in the Premier League, because I haven't seen it often enough. I've seen when they come up against the big teams that they kind of shrink, that they're not as good on those big occasions. So I need to see something from Chelsea. If you made me guess right now, I don't think Chelsea are playing Champions League football next season. Really? I think they will drop out. I think they're going to lose to Liverpool. I think they're going to lose to Newcastle. And there will be odds against. I think Villa are the team from 7th. They're going to overtake them. You look at their fixture list, a little bit kinder in the run into the season. I think Villa are going to overtake Chelsea.
If that does happen for Chelsea, who's to blame? Is it the players, the manager? Because early on in the season, they looked nailed on. I mean, at one point, we were talking about them as potential title contenders. I know Maresca said that was far too early for that, but Cole Palmer was on form early on. They looked really good going forward. Jackson was scoring goals. And then they really fell off, didn't they? Who would be to blame if they don't make it?
Well, I would start with Maresca maybe a little bit. I think the fans are not terribly satisfied with the football right now. It's a little bit staid. It's a little bit boring. It's a little bit lack of endeavor and lack of creativity in the team. Cole Palmer has fallen off this season massively from where he was. You look at his run of games, he's having a really terrible run of it at the moment. And I think in the overall, this project, for as much as they've spent on a team that's built for the future. It's not built for the present. You look at the lack of experience in the team. They have never really competed at this level. They still wear the badge of Chelsea. They still wear the blue of Chelsea. But it's not the Chelsea team that we're used to seeing. This is a team of largely players under the age of 26 that have never really done it at a terribly high level, that have not done it at a terribly high level collectively, yet that are still figuring it out. So I think over the course of a long season, when they're playing Conference League, when they're going forward in domestic competitions, and obviously in the Premier League, I still think that they have a ways to develop. And part of that is because that's what the project is. The project is we want to have the best player at every position at a young age. So in 3 years' time, we're the best team in the world. But they're not there yet. They're not that good yet. So Maresca was right to warn at the beginning of the season that they weren't ready to hit that standard yet, title-winning standard yet, because I don't think that they're there. And I think now, when push comes to shove in these big 4 games that they have left to play that are all incredibly difficult, I'm not certain that they're ready to deliver yet.
Aston Villa, the side with the most work to do, currently in 7th on 57 points. Regardless of whether they get into the Champions League, it looks like they'll get into the Europa League for next season. It's been an amazing season for them, obviously enjoying that special Champions League campaign under Unai Emery. Do you think a top 7 finish is sort of fair enough, given all of the things they had to focus on this season?
Yeah, I mean, if you say at the beginning of the season, I'll give you quarterfinals of the Champions League and top 7, you'd probably take it. The one thing that concerns me, though, is they went and spent a ton in January to go and bring in Asensio, Rashford, they have Daniel Malen in the team. They did really well in the January transfer window. I think to keep it, they're going to need Champions League football next season. So I think that this push towards the end of the season is very important. They obviously earned a lot of revenue from being in the Champions League, but I think that needs to be self-sustaining for them to continue to compete at the level that they have fancied themselves so far this season. So I think Aston Villa are a team that need to get some results at the end of the season and would love Champions League football next season, because then you can go to Marcus Rashford and be like, hey, we've got the money to pay your transfer fee, to pay you a good wage, and you can continue to thrive in our environment. His injury, though, is a big part of this final rush to the season to get into those Champions League places, but I think they'll have enough to do it.